and we are so proud to have an event like this. Number one, you're going to see a very powerful film. And if you wouldn't mind, in the process of watching that film, you might watch a young man and a girl who is his sister grow up. And when the film is finished, with the help of Dr. Jacob Howland, I'm sorry about my voice, Jacob, I apologize. We will have a Q&A afterwards. Those who wish to stay, feel free. Those who don't, feel free to leave. But it's a very powerful film. And to think we have the son of that gentleman, who by his own token, having been with him 2 days, is a pretty bright dude himself. And I'm not going to mislead you on that. This is, and I'll just introduce him now and he'll come out and speak. This is it. Yuval Rabin. This is the man right here. This is our 3rd annual Jewish Film Fest, and every year it's got bigger and bigger, so we can only realize what we challenge us for next year. So if you have ideas, let us know. If they're feasible, we'll try. We did the best we could this year, but we had great turnout for all the films, and we will look forward to doing it again next year. And please come to Circle. We live off your movie tickets, and I might add the popcorn. And but we thank you so much for being here tonight. Let's watch the film, and then after that we'll do the Q&A, and look forward to it. Thank you all again for coming. Appreciate it.
I'd like to thank Yuval Rabin for coming all the way to Oklahoma, direct from Israel, and coming here directly to no other theater, and to be here this evening for the screening of this film. Thank you, Mr. Rabin.
Thank you.
And I would also like to thank Clark and Michelle Weens and Kelly Weens and the Circle Cinema for hosting this wonderful film festival, and also for bringing this particular film here to Tulsa. And I want to thank the board of the Circle Cinema, the supporters of the Circle Cinema, and the sponsors of the film festival. So thanks to all of you. Okay. My role this evening is very simple. I am to call on you. You ask a question, I will repeat it so that everyone can hear it, and Yuval Rabin will give his response. So, please, questions. So the question was, with the change of governments now, it seems like extremists are in power in the Middle East, in Israel. So where do you see the peace process going in the current condition or current situation?
First of all, good evening, and I want to join all the people who join you in thanking all the people that made this evening possible, and for all of you for attending and watching this movie. And thank you all. We live in definitely in a very chaotic period, and we all see that what seems to have started, and of course it's debatable, but what seems to have started with the signing of Oslo continue to express itself in various forms of terrorism, not just in the Middle East, but extending and reaching to pretty much the rest of the world. But I would like to think that, and I've been actively pursuing this direction in thinking that chaos does create opportunities. And with the new threats and the new risks that are emanating from both the terror-based, state-based terror and the non-state terror organizations, is targeting not just the West, but quite a few other Arab countries. And I think we actually, on one hand, are experiencing an era of opportunity, of joint risks and joint interests between Israel and many of the moderate Arab countries. And this is not just theoretical. This is actually happening as we are sitting here and talking. Israel is cooperating with Egypt. Israel is cooperating with Jordan. Israel is cooperating with the PA, even if it's not appreciated as much and understood here and elsewhere. Israel is cooperating with the Gulf states, with Saudi Arabia. There's much more information and intelligence sharing occurring, and with the support of the United States and without it, to conduct a much more successful war on terror. We are benefiting from it. Israel is not alone vis-à-vis Hamas today. We have the Egyptian government, and we have other governments, other Arab governments, shoulder to shoulder with us for shared interests, not for any other reason. So the question is, will we know and will we have leaderships on our side, on the other side, to seize this opportunity and to solidify the opportunity to make something more longer lasting?
So the question is, what does Yuval Rabin do now in Israel?
So I guess like most people, my life is split between for-profit and non-profit. I'm involved with various non-profit organizations. Many of them are relevant to the memory and the commemoration of my late father. I'm also a co-founder of an organization called the Israeli Peace Initiative, which has been active formally for the last 5+ or almost 6 years, and informally for the decade. And we've been actively promoting an Israeli awareness and Israeli response to the Arab Peace Initiative, an initiative which was tabled almost a decade and a half ago, started out as a Saudi peace initiative. And while no initial proposal is perfect, it has some very interesting ideas and some very interesting concepts that we strongly believe, that Israel should, at the very least, offer a counter proposal. And this is what this is probably my primary focus, my involvement with the Israeli Peace Initiative. For my for-profit, my professional life, I've been a software engineer, and I've been in the software business for pretty much most of my life. I'm involved with various technology companies. I'm just now starting a new initiative which is relevant to marine technologies. We're hoping to establish a marine R&D center in the Haifa port, and that's what takes pretty much most of my time these days.
So the question is, many of Israel's leaders came from the armed forces. They had military experience. And the question is, are there any people in the armed forces now who could assume leadership, who have the qualities and potential to assume leadership?
So if I may, I'd first want to address this question in a more general way. The world in general, I think, is experiencing leadership issues. And I mean it, and I don't mean any country specifically, and I'm not saying this lightly. And you mentioned the series of Israeli leaders that have led, and I think what's pretty common these days is that we and I say this in the broadest term of the way, we, the democratic countries of the world, are willing to accept leaders that are less and less experienced, that have rose up in domains which do not require very expressed and proven leadership qualities. And I think that's a big shame. And when we look at when we look at the potential sources for leaders, I think definitely the armed forces are ones. I know, definitely know about our armed forces and security apparatus. They invest massive amount of efforts to train and build leadership qualities in the people. I think the business world also, you don't become a real business leader unless you have leadership qualities, unless you know how to motivate and lead your subordinates, your employees, your engineers, your salespeople to actually go out and create the excitement and the products and the enthusiasm required to bring a real product that people want to bring it to usage. And so I think again it's kind of an issue that we are taking more and more leaders that are coming unprepared, and I don't want to delve into this part too much, but it's, I think, in a presidential structure like the United States, it may be less important when you have the institutions, you have the cabinet, which is typically mostly a professional appointees, where you have the National Security Agency, people who are appointed and are dedicated, hopefully, to their leader. If you take a coalition government, which is composed of literally 3 or 4 parties which are pretty much equal size, you have a prime minister with surrounded by 3 or 4 other key members of the coalition who are holding key positions, who basically think every minute, every minute they're awake, how they can succeed the prime minister. That makes ruling almost impossible. So when you are a leader in such an environment, and you are busy watching your back more time than anything else, then that certainly prevents the ability to take bold decisions and lead through difficult processes that, like it or not, they come posing themselves to whoever is holding the lead position. Now, the last component of my answer is that there's no way that amongst the 8 million Israelis or the 300 some million Americans, there are no leaders capable of leading our relative countries. And IDF, as I mentioned, there are many members of the IDF who are potential leaders. I think that sadly the Israeli business community has failed to produce real leaderships, because they just, when we see how vicious and ugly and unattractive politics are, very few actually do want to get involved. So that's a pretty long answer to it. I hope I answered your question.
I would just like to make a small comment before I call on the next person. I thought the film it was very subtle and very moving to see Shimon Peres and your father in these helicopters traveling together, 2 old men who had been there from the beginning of the state. I mean, and your father was, fought in these wars, was Labor Party, agriculture, and now, of course, the leaders, they're not going to have that experience. And our country's much older, so it's impossible in our situation. But I thought the film did a very nice job of showing sort of the passing of this era as well. Anyway, just an editorial comment. David. So the question is, what is Yitzhak Rabin's reputation now among the far right? Is he still viewed as a traitor, or is there some sense of remorse?
So I would think that there's both, but I mean, you will see quite a lot of the same expressions going on till today, and for me it's of course very disturbing, and I take it very personally when I see this continued finger pointing, and the by now is accused of you know, whatever number they want to 1,700, 2,000 killed in the acts of terrors that occurred up to a decade after his assassination. It's really much more complicated, and I want to, if I may, I want to take it slightly to a more higher level observation. I would welcome anyone that's still kind of using this rhetoric and using this type of thinking, which is the more worrying thing, is let's analyze in a retrospect of 20 years or 21 years or 26 years from the signing of the 23 years from the signing of the Oslo Accord, how much did the various Palestinian factions, and specifically, let's say, PLO on one hand, and Hamas and these jihadists, achieved through negotiations, and how much have they achieved through violence? And that, to me, is the big answer. With my father, the answer was very clear. He was willing to be to compromise politically and totally uncompromising on security. And with all the tough talk and the seemingly uncompromising attitude, Hamas achieved significant successes through the use of violence long after my father was killed. And we can go back to the release of the Gilad Shalit, freeing of 1,027 terrorists in exchange for one Israeli kidnapped soldier. Prime Minister Olmert steadfast declined the same deal for a few years, and trust me, he cared just as much about this soldier, and his wife cared just as much about this soldier. He would not cave into this terrorist demand. In 1997, we sent, was almost king's honor, the founder, the arch-terrorist Sheikh Yassin, back to Gaza. And if you ask me, of all the events that happened since the signing of Oslo, what is the single most devastating act that occurred is the release of the Sheikh Yassin to go back to Gaza, to revive Hamas, and to deteriorate the standing of the Palestinian Authority to the point Hamas became the force that we know it as we know it today. And when we go out and allocate or measure how many of the fatalities, how many of the injuries in the terrorist activities were a result of Hamas activity, jihadist activity, it's almost probably close to 100%, 95%. So these are the things that I think that should be the topic of discussion. And another aspect of this, your question, unfortunately, very sad, my father is dead 21 years. This same mechanism, this same tactic is carried on to this day. Every single individual, regardless of his service, of his contribution to the country, whether they headed the Mossad, whether they headed the Shabak, whether they headed the IDF, and they dare to express some willingness to view the other side's issues, to express views in regards to some level of compromise, they are automatically and immediately categorized as traitors. So the problem is not what happened 21 years ago. The question, and the very dangerous question, is how do we continue moving forward?
So 20 years ago, roughly half the country was in favor of peace, and the perception is that the right in the interim. And the question is there any movement back toward the left or toward peace?
So I think there's some anomaly here, because clearly the voting pattern has shown a shift to the right, but and I mentioned the Israeli Peace Initiative earlier on, and we poll. We've been polling for at least the last 5 years, and we continuously show and see that if a prime minister, and maybe specifically the existing prime minister, will present to the Israeli public a proposal in the spirit of what we believe needs to be done, he will get 60 to 65% of approval. So it's feasible. It's feasible, and all it takes is leadership and the guts to do it.
So the question is, or the observation, that the Labor Party is losing votes in the Knesset, and the votes of the parties that would be in favor of negotiation and so forth are going to the right-wing parties.
So again, let's look at the map, the political map. The breakdown between right and left is pretty consistent. The problem is that we have our political system is not I don't know to say broken down. Let's look objectively. You know, Netanyahu had what is considered a landslide victory. He's got 30 seats. 25% of the seats are perceived as a major victory. And that's because prior elections we were shifting, hovering around the 27, 28, and even lower numbers for the leading party, the ruling party. So the breakdown between the parties within each camp is the problem. And the coming of the new parties, the what we call the trendy parties, the spiritual parties that come and go. Now it's Yesh Atid, and before that we had Kadima, and before that we had the longest list. So I personally have tried, in my very limited capabilities in the last few elections, to promote the idea of two parties. If you're right-winger, vote Likud. If you are a left-winger, vote Labor. Don't waste the vote. Let each of the parties have, and that would allow and create the stability needed for the party that can build a coalition to have some reasonable, and avoid the situation that I mentioned earlier, where a prime minister is surrounded by three potential heirs who are basically daily thinking how they can get rid of him and take over.
So the question is, since Yitzhak Rabin was working with the Clintons at the time of the Oslo Accords and so forth. Is there any prospect that if Hillary Clinton were elected, that would perhaps give an impetus or a boost to the peace process?
So let me say it this way. I think that it really is not the role of the United States or any other country, not the EU and not the UN and not the French and not the Quartet and whatever other collection or permutation of countries. It's our responsibility. And Oslo happened without the United States involvement. It's our leadership's responsibility to find the partners, and there are partners, and to build the relationships, to negotiate. Then the United States can come in, the other superpowers, the UN, can come in and provide the umbrella, provide the facilities, facilitate the negotiations, but it's not the role of anyone else but ourselves.
So the comment is, the questioner heard the expression blue on white, Israelis defending themselves and making their own self-determination, and she feels that this is what Yuval Rabin was saying.
Well, I'm not 100% sure I know the context of this blue and white, but yes, this is what we've been doing from day one of our existence and even prior to that, and I think the movie showed it. I think that every Israeli government and leader maintain that we are responsible for our security, and we expect no one, and we should not expect anyone to be responsible for our security. You know, of course, some help is always accepted if it comes in billions of dollars. But I think that, and as I implied in the answer for the previous question, we should also assume the responsibility for the peace process, and not just for the building the strength to defend ourselves.
How might Israel get rid of the influence of the Haradim, the right-wing Orthodox, to save itself? Is that correct? Okay, yeah.
I think the answer is very similar to the answer that I mentioned earlier. A political system that allows a faction, a political party of 5, 6, 8 individuals to be the what's the tipping point, the balancing, and is the issue. And it may be the Haradim, and it may be others. So that's the major issue. I think clearly there are some major issues involved with the various minorities, and the Haradim no exception, because of their ability to leverage their political strength. But the implications are much more far-reaching in terms of the issue of equal responsibilities, equal not just equal rights, but equal what's the opposite of obligations, commitments. The participation in the education system, this is what we call the core subject. Should we teach math, English, and for every child or not? So yes, it's complicated, but I think the solution lies within a more stable political system.
So the question is, what does our speaker think about the nuclear non-proliferation deal with Iran? And the other part was, how would Israel respond if Iran? What would Israel do if Iran is not upholding its obligations under that agreement?
So I'll take the second part first, and the answer is very simple. I think the responsibility of every leadership is to secure, first and foremost, create a secure environment for its citizens, and this is no exception. And in case they're validated a threat, and I'm not all that concerned about the Iranian. I mean, the same story was the wolves, like the Iranian issue has been a threat for 2.5 decades already, and it's always been 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years away from a bomb, and when the bomb eventually does come, people don't rush to use the bomb, and I think we have to come from a point of view that we are strong, we are the only superpower, and we have the deterrence, and I think we can, and in reality, when you go to Israel and you talk to Israelis, no one will bring up the Iranian issue. It's not as much as an issue as it's here. Now, this agreement was not just the United States. I mean, I don't understand why we are faulting President Obama and the Obama administration on this agreement when it was negotiated with, the Europeans and Russia. Meanwhile, Russia is selling arms and arming Iran, arming Hezbollah, and nobody faults them. So, I trust the leadership of our security apparatus. I hear our general say that this agreement did create, did buy the time that it designed to do. Iran is a problematic neighbor. It's the worst neighbor, and this is exactly why I've been promoting the Israeli peace initiative in the last decade, because we do need to be the coalition, the regional NATO, the alliances with those that are just as equally threatened by Iran, both on the terror side and the nuclear side.
Yuval Rabin, thank you for
Thank
coming.
you very much.